puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. Escribir, por ejemplo, La noche está estrellada. That was Neruda through a small plastic portable, blue with white knobs, when I was 10. A mother woke me to listen by the red needle of the dial, its window throwing a half-yellow light in the bedroom.
You start the book with lines from Neruda. Is Neruda part of your literary universe, and who else is there in your reference of poetry?
Besides Neruda, there's just so many now poets, too many to maybe to even begin to name. It changes all the time. But I think some people that are very essential for me are people like Garcia Lorca, especially his book Poetry in New York, Neruda's Residence on Earth. Also, I would have to say Cesar Vallejo. And then if we start thinking about contemporary American poetry, I'm very much fond of the work by our past poet laureate, Philip Levine,
Wonderful.
and Yusef Komunyaka. But, and there's always the monsters of the English language, people like Keats, that I go back to a lot, and Elizabeth Bishop as well. So, but those are just few. There's just so many people, it's great, it's to have such a range to where to choose from.
You were born in El Salvador. You came to the U.S. when you were 12, is that right?
Right.
What I have read by you is all in English, like The Art of Exile, and also you have a new manuscript. Do you write in Spanish, or do you only write in English?
I only write in English because it's the language that I developed. When I came to the United States back in 1980, I was 12, and since we had the fear of being deported, I think when we got to this country, it was very, very clear that we had to learn the culture, learn the language, and basically burn bridges, forget about what happened back there in El Salvador, and then just move on, You're here now, assimilate. And I think in that process, I lost a lot of my culture, and a lot of my own language. I did not develop it. Instead, I developed the English language. And so that's the language I feel most comfortable with, and it's actually kind of ironic for me to say that, because sometimes you're like, yeah, it's the language I feel more comfortable with, but then sometimes I'm like, wait, how do you say that word, or am I pronouncing it right, or how do you... So, and it goes back and forth with Spanish as well, when I start a conversation in Spanish with somebody, I'm always like, I feel like, wait, how do you say that? I mean, like in the back of my mind, I'm trying to always look for the words, and I struggle a lot.
Do you think Spanish is somehow in the background of your English writing, like in the rhythm or in the grammar choices?
I think so, especially when I started writing, and I was very, very, very much into reading Neruda.
Okay.
And just the vast emotional freedom that you get from his work in the Spanish language. That is what I was attracted to when I started reading his work. And I think that somehow I feel surging underneath the English language when I write.
The Art of Exile is built with a lot of images of war. Is from your own experience. I think it's a very difficult topic. When did you start writing about the war?
I started writing consciously in 1992, right after I came back from El Salvador. It was the year the peace treaty was signed in El Salvador between the left wing and the right wing parties. And I felt that was the right time for me to go without being afraid of getting killed. I expected to go back to my own native country, and
to what it was.
To what it was, exactly. To what it was, and to feel comfortable at home, that I was going to be able to pick up the language, pick up the rhythm, and just feel one of the natives. It was the complete opposite. I felt like a stranger in a strange land. I feel like I couldn't communicate. I feel so out of tune. Everything had changed. The landscape had changed. The people that I once knew, the entire generation, were gone. It was like a new whole wave of people that were living there that had gone through something tremendous that I had not completely experienced. So when I came back, I couldn't cope with those feelings. These feelings of exile, of feeling alienated, of feeling like I don't have a home, this sense of loneliness and abandonment just began to searching me. And that's when I consciously started writing about the war. But at that moment, I did not write with the idea that I'm going to write a book of poems that I want to publish and I want to be serious about this. It was more like it was a necessity. I had to get it out. And then in the process of doing that, I began to feel elated when I would write down my words on the paper. And I began to feel that I had a strong communication or connection with other people that had gone through the same experiences as me, other immigrants like me. It took I think a couple of years to realize like, oh, this is a calling here.
Do you think your birth as a poet is connected with your awareness of the exile?
Yeah, very much, and it seems like I'm condemned to write about everything that was lost, because it seems like the more I think, okay, I'm over this, I can turn the page, I can move on. The more I think about that, and I start writing about new, subjects, or I go into different regions, I realize that slowly creeping up again. It comes back. It's definitely my home base is definitely part of my identity. Yeah.
When you write about the war, and I think it's Brandon Constantine said something that I thought was fascinating. He said to find the difference between empathy and theft. Like when you write about the war, how do you find the right tone to write about the war?
I think it helps me a bit being one who experienced that. And although I did not live throughout the whole war, the whole 12 years, I did experience the beginnings of it, of the war. So it helps to be part of it. That's one thing. The other thing I think is that it was not more about like, I'm going to point fingers here. I'm going to tell you who's responsible. I'm going to tell you who you should go out for. It was more about like the human side of it, because it's something that has been branded in me since I was a kid, walking home after school and finding dead bodies on the road on the way home, with bed sheets thrown over them, and it's people that it's people from your neighborhood, it's friends or classmates or your soccer friend, from your team.
It is an extraordinary book. It is extraordinary. And I would like, if you don't mind, reading one poem. And it's a good example of what you were explaining. The title is By the Highway.
The sun, a small ball in the morning sky, finds a slumped body on dirt ground. Peasant hands, two knots of fist swollen and stiff. Deep, dark creases like two strong Nicaraguan cigars, laid open, nailed with dust. The eyes, two burnt-out votives or empty jail cells, tell the chronicles of last night. Rifle butts that crack open a body, tattered, twisted, broken frame of bones. Luis is dead, dead without his shoes. Nothing in my hands can bring him back to walk this earth, lost in the pale golden rose of cornstalk and sun.
Do you have a particular method or a particular pattern when you write?
It changes all the time. I think for me, three things have to happen when I'm writing. one of them, there's have to be something emotional at stake, something so strong in me that is forcing me to sit down to write this down, to write. So I have to have that going. Second, I have to have some kind of form. And that form would change depending on the subject. Sometimes the experience itself dictates the structure of the poem. And the third thing is the poem has to be about more than one thing. There has to be more than one thing happening in the poem. You know, it can't just be about a dead pig. It has to be about a dead pig, and it has to also be about the slaughter of a generation.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to have several things going on in the poem. Now, if I have all those things going on in the poem, then I'm very happy with the poem. It doesn't always happen. You know, I'm not always successful with that. But I think it usually starts with a creative inspiration, you know, where I just don't allow myself to be, how do I say, edited.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't edit myself. I just write, and later on I go back and edit with a cold hand. Although I have to say that if I'm tapping on that creative inspiration systematically, I guess,
On a regular basis,
Yeah.
it becomes more alive.
yeah, it's like it already knows. Oh, we're gonna work today, so you know it's up with me, and we go and sit down and we write, and it happens, and it's very. It's very much like, and I know that sometimes this feels like it's too much of a touchy-feely thing, but it's very much like, almost like a spiritual experience for me. Because the act of writing the poem, for me, it's a very sacred moment. You feel like that you're like, it's a moment where you're getting in touch with a certain force that has been here before you. It's like Garcia Lorca's Duende,
Yeah.
right? And it's, I feel in my case, for my own duende, it comes from the earth that where I was born from. You know, from as a boy, I used to eat the earth, you know, and we used to make mud cakes, you know, and I used to eat that stuff, and I feel like, I very strongly feel that creative inspiration came from the earth I ate, you know, and it's in me now.
Wow.
Yeah.
We have neurosis as a writer. You cannot write at certain time at night, or you're only a morning person, or you cannot write on a white, or you have to use the paper or something like that. Do you have any of these neuroses?
I find myself writing in a room with the door closed, and I sit and I'm there for 4 hours, and I'm writing, and usually I can knock down a poem that I can share. Sometimes I'm reading in the middle of the night, wake up, and because something came up from the reading, and I write it down. And I go to bed thinking like, oh, that was a good line, right? And I get up the next morning, I'm like, oh, I'm excited to look at what I wrote, and you know, in the middle of the night, I look, that doesn't make sense. That's not good.
You have a lot of references to music in your book. You have one
Yeah.
of the poems is called Immigration Blues. You have on First Listening to
Coltrane.
and also you have one about Duke Ellington.
I feel like music, like poetry, is essential to our lives. I'm a big jazz fan, so I feel a very close connection to that music, because when I first listened to jazz, in this case Coltrane, I felt a kind of freedom in the playing, a kind of healing, and I think it was because it was rather a time where I was going through all these emotions about the war and immigration, and when I first listened to this music, I felt like there was a sense of freedom in the feeling, and that I felt like as I listened more to jazz music, I feel like they became also just like the writers that I was reading became people who, or artists who were also became influential for me. I'll give you an example. Thelonious Monk, who is a master of silence in his music, and he never tells you the entire story. he leaves things out, right? And so when you hear it, you're not hearing the note, but you hear it though. You know it's there. So it's almost like poetry. You don't tell the whole story, right? You leave things out. So in that sense, I think those writers have helped me a lot to understand what poetry is about.
The Art of Exile, published by Bilingual Press, received the Emerging Writer Fellowship Award and also the International Latino Book Award.
Right.
How do you place yourself or see yourself in the community of Latino writers in Los Angeles?
In Los Angeles?
In Los Angeles or in the U.S. I'm talking about Los Angeles because it's more like probably the community we are more in contact with.
I don't see myself as someone in the Latino community of writers yet, I guess, because I haven't experienced it that much, I suppose.
Okay.
I'm very much appreciative of the support that I've gotten, especially here in LA, and in Letras Latinas and Bilingual Press. But beyond that, I think it's still to be seen what's going to happen. I think I'm just a beginner. I'm just getting my feet wet.
The label is very tricky because on one hand,
Yeah.
the label gives you a platform like the Bilingual Press or the Latino. So it helps with the visibility, with the platform, but at the same time imposes a certain limitation.
Yeah, it does, especially with Bilingual Press, because most people when they ask me about the book and I say, oh, it's out in Bilingual Press. Oh, it's a bilingual translation. It's written in Spanish. I'm like, no, that just happened to be the name of the press. But it does sort of like frame me as a Latino writer.
Yeah.
And then under that, it frames me as a Latino writer of Central America about the war. So it really limits the people who will go to the book, and I think that comes with but it's part. I guess it's part of the game, this thing called poetry or this po-biz. We should really try to understand that it's whatever experience that writer is trying to express. Doesn't necessarily mean that writer, that's who that writer is. It's just that's the reality of that writer at that time.
Yeah.
So and that reality will probably change, as the years go by. So I think we make mistakes when we think like, oh, he's a Latino poet, or he's a gay poet, or he's an African American poet. As opposed to like he's just a poet.
Your manuscript, The Grave Diggers Archaeology, was selected by Orlando Ricardo Menes for the 2013 Letras Latinas Red Hen Poetry Prize. You have another manuscript in the making. Yeah,
the second manuscript, just I think it's more like a continuation of the second one, where I'm branching out, trying to dig a little bit deeper into who I am and where I came from and where I'm going.
This is
the Grave Diggers Archaeology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a collection of poems about digging into memory.
Okay.
And right now I'm writing about something else.
What is this something else?
I don't have a name for the new manuscript, but I'm writing a series of poems on the Mayas.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm writing a series of sonnets on a pre-Columbian myth from El Salvador. So that's stuff that I never thought I would do with the Art of Exile, which was more about this, explosion of feelings about the war and immigration that were coming out, and therefore I had to later on, put it down on paper, but later on find some form to it. Now, when I sit down to write these poems, which are leading me towards the underworld, it seems like that's the path that I'm going with this new manuscript. The more I do that, the more I realize that now I'm thinking, as I'm writing, as I'm allowing that emotional surge come out, I'm also thinking of form at the same time. So I'm very excited with the new work. I again, like, you know, every time I have to deal with the second manuscript, it's really weird because I'm like, oh yeah, right, what was that poem about? And I have to go back and read it again and go, oh, that's, you know, because when you write, you hear that voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you put, you know, you put the manuscript away. It finally gets accepted. It finally gets published. It's 5 years later.
But you are somewhere else. You are in
Yeah,
another,
you are somewhere else.
you're
Like,
in another voice.
right.
With other feet. Do you think that sometimes when you look at the previous manuscripts, sometimes you have that feeling like, oh my God, this is not a good poem. But then sometimes it's like, how did they manage to write this?
Yeah.
Like,
All
this
the
is-
time.
This is like, I'm very surprised.
Yeah.
Who wrote this thing?
Yes, yes, that's a strange feeling. I mean, it happens at least once or twice with the manuscripts, where you do go back to the poem and you read it, and you're like, you know, I go to my wife and I say, hey, this is good. Did you read this? You know, I can't believe I wrote that. Did I write that? That's me. Yeah, that happens a lot. And I think that's when you realize that, you know, you're listening too much to other people. You're listening too much to all the noise that's going around you, you know, with the whole poetry business, you know, with the whole idea of having to get published, having to have reading gigs, you know, where are you teaching, and, you know,
Yes.
are you going to AWP? And it's like, and it's like, that's not why I'm writing. That's nice, and it's great. That's beautiful. I love it, you know. I'm sure I'll get to that one day, and I'll do that. And that's nice for most people. But I don't know. I feel like that sometimes throws me off. You know, maybe because I can't really focus in 3-5 different things at once. You know, I'm like very like, okay, it's like, this is it right here.
To end the interview, I would like you to read one poem from. Is it gonna be from the Grave Digger? Or-
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I always had the issue of being tongue-tied when I meet someone I admire. You know, someone like if I were to meet one of my heroes, if I was to meet Coltrane, or if I was to meet Neruda,
Yeah.
what would I say? You know, and I always feel like I would. What do you say to these people, right?
Yeah.
So I gave my challenge of doing that, of writing a poem, and I chose Charles Mingus, the jazz artist, composer, band leader, piano player, activist in the 60s. 3 minutes with Mingus. When I read of poets and their bios, son of a milkman and seamstress, raised in a whistle-stop town or village, a child who spent his after-school hours deep in the pages of a library book. I want to go back to my childhood, back to the war, rescue that boy under the bed, listening to what bullets can do to a man. Take him out of the homeland, enroll him in a school, his class a size of 10. Unfold the fables of the sea. A Spanish galleon slamming up and down the high waters. This is why I write poems, why I prefer solitude when I listen to your lazy sound of brass on the phonograph. You give language to black roosters and fossil bones. Break down phrases between the LA River and the yellow taxicabs of New York. I picture you in Watts, the 200-pound wrath of a bass player building up steam, woodshedding for the strictly segregated hood, those who seek a tiny shot of God, digging through hard pan, the hammers grunt and blow. I need a gut bucket of gospel, the flat land of cotton to catch all those Chinese acrobats bubbling inside your head. When I think of the day I will no longer hold a pencil within my hands or glance upon the spines of my books, I hear Picasso's Guernica in your half-choked cries. A gray workhorse lost in the fire's spiraling notes. A shrieking tenor sax for the woman falling out of a burning house. I want to tell you, if I wrote like you pick and pat in blues and roots, I would understand the caravel of my childhood, loose without oars or sails, rolling on the swells of a distant sea. That's all I got, Mr. Mingus. I give you the archaeology of my words, every painstaking sound I utter when I come to the end of a line, especially the stress beats of a tiny country I lost long ago.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.